Huh, finally on a new series, eh? With Eiji Tsuburaya passing in 1970 despite his plan of 7 ending the series, Ultraman seemed to be too popular to keep down, so the return of Ultraman rebooted the series with Tsuburaya's son taking over to try and capture the skill that went into the original 2 shows. Did this revival show capture and or expand on the unique goodness in suitmation, effects, pacing and such? Well, let's find out in this new area of Ultramania as I break down the return of Ultraman. I'll try and keep things tight here, so I'll review the first 2 episodes as one, as they're pretty much a double part in setting things up. While Ultraman and 7's first episode played out pretty slowly and mysteriously to give an impact with the first opponent, while solidly setting up the characters, Jack's first episode, All Monsters Attack, wastes no time with diving headfirst into kaiju goodness, with 2 aquatic monsters, Takkong and Zazan, rising from the ocean and doing what rubber monsters do best in Tokyo Bay. The suits are completely contrasting in terms of mobility, so the grappling is a bit awkward, but who the hell cares? For a show to open on such an action-packed note is neat for a first try, and the miniature set and camera angles are great, making it a damn solid first fight. Meanwhile, the show cuts off to the underwater base of the show's defense force, MAT, Monster Attack Team, getting little time to adjust to them as they also waste no time in diving in head first. We do get some neat cinematography with the jet plane launches though. After a few rounds of assaults from the air on the aquatic weirdos, we're also introduced to the other main characters of the show. Ken Sakata, the car repair shop owner, his younger sister Aki, and kid brother Jiro, and the protagonist of the show, Hideki Go. Scared that the construction of Sakata's race car will get destroyed by the monsters, Jiro runs off to the kaiju mashing. Why? I get that he's like 9, but why would you run towards the creatures to try and save the car? Why? Still, after catching him up, Goh puts his life on the line to save a distressed boy and his dog at the sight of the behemoths. Takkong manages to kill Zazan but still hasn't let all his steam out, crushing a couple of buildings that unfortunately crumbles on the fleeing 2. The boy makes it out, but Goh takes the worst and succumbs to his wounds. With Takkong retreating, Goh is rushed to the hospital in a critical state and slowly but surely takes steps towards the Grim Reaper. I like how emotional and tragic this scene feels for a campy kids show. The camera angles towards Goh's fleeing pulse and blank expressions to the darkly shot looks of horror on his family makes it pretty moving, although it would have been nicer to have seen more of Goh and his family in their normal lives instead of going full action-packed before this scene to build up a more solid bond to them and make the scene more impactful, but it's still pretty solid. There's also a scene where they hold a cremation of their memories of Goh and burn his car to send him to a better place, and that Ken couldn't finish the car without him. I do think that the scene goes a little over the top with emotions as we barely know Goh at all, making quirks such as a visage of his former self happily sitting in his race car being pretty cheesy given he's practically a stranger to us, which is a shame because it's pretty well done given the melancholic music and lighting and pretty neat acting. However, the next scene makes for a really neat pull-off, as Goh meets a rather peculiar visitor, this of course being Ultraman, or Ultraman Jack, or whatever. The show itself really obscurely presents this Ultra as either the original or something else. Anyway, Jack says he was touched by Goh's act of courage at no concern to his own life, and says that he'll revive him so that they can fuse and fight for the future of humanity. Basically the same revival scene as in the original, but pulled off so much more imaginatively, such as the suspenseful way Ultraman is revealed, almost as if the light is Goh passing into the afterlife, to the intriguing camera angles such as when Jack speaks to Goh, but the fusing scene just takes the cake, with the very cleverly done ways of effects and the blissful background sounds, making everything feel a sort of magic. With Matt finding no further traces of the whereabouts of Takkong or any other threats, things seem to be providing a nice opportunity for Goh to tune back to reality, pleased to be with his family again, but not so pleased to see his unfinished prized race car burnt to a crisp. But it seems Ken has another plan for Goh than a race car driver. As a Matt's vehicle revs up, the captain explains his interest in having Goh join the team, provided his example of great sacrificial determination to save people and excellent physical health. Okay, so... What? Okay, so he ran into a building to save a boy getting crushed, but he also has 0 qualifications to be a member, 0 experience and training in weaponry, piloting and such, so how could he simply join for being recklessly determined? If a homeless person ran into a burning building to save someone, would it be natural for an officer to rev up the next day and say, "New Lieutenant Jones, I expect you to report to front desk at 8 AM sharp"? God, what a bunch of clowns. Still, a slightly more concerning matter occurs when Goh suddenly catches a telepathical instinct to drive off 300 kilometers to a burning village, where we're introduced to the third kaiju of the show, Earthtron. Oh sweet baby Jesus, can this episode not jam-pack enough? Earthtron's rampage is your usual chunk of destruction goodness. Given we hardly ever got any scenes of dumb rampaging in 7, it's nice to see the series kind of go back to its roots to see a simple monster through a spastic fit of brawn and fire on a wafer village, with the military not inflicting shit, and the unique night setting does add some nice atmosphere and cover up things that are generally lacking in miniature sets. With attacking Earthtron being just as easy as watching the Elephant Man all the way through, Goh arrives and does what he does best, storming in knee-deep into a painful death to recklessly try to help people. Thankfully though, someone's here to back up his ass, and we get to see the return of a lost hero. The first fight of the show is a damn solid one at that. Jack's fighting style is at a much faster pace than the other 2 Ultras, and there are some pretty satisfying impacts and maneuvers here, so it's never dull. Earthtron's a worthy opponent, but Jack just goes as harshly as Arthur Shelby from Peaky Blinders and Daniel Plainview in the ending of There Will Be Blood, applying his makeup with a specium ray to the face. The next day, the team of Matt set up a top secret mission of a little spot of lunch before coming across the unconscious Goh. After coming back, we're properly introduced to the main members: Katsushiro Kato, Ryu Ibuki, Takashi Minami, Ippei Uno, Fumio Kishida, and Yuriko Oka. But the episode isn't over yet. As Goh spots the Ultra Sky in the Dawn Sky, the voice of Jack gives a speech that he will work with Goh's hard determination and good heart to defeat all who try to vanquish humanity's freedom and happiness. The second episode, Takkong's Counterattack, basically wraps up what was unanswered in the first episode that needed a proper introduction. It starts with Goh's training being held to test his capabilities, which, yeah, I guess, you know, should have been held before assigning Goh to Matt. I mean, aha, what if he flunked everything? That would have been kinda embarrassing, right? You fucking idiots! Thankfully, with the help of a particular cheeky man of Ultra, Goh excels in every area from kendo to long-range shooting. Shortly after, Takkong's reappearance is unleashed after destroying an oil tanker and shrugging off an aerial attack before resubmerging. With this being noted, Matt plans out a sneak attack by a submarine, assigning Goh and Minami to carry the operation. I do like how the creature is lurking right next to the underwater HQ, which adds a little more tension and higher risks. Upon hunting down and trailing the big sucker, Goh immediately does what he does best, diving in headfirst, ignoring Minami's urges to stick to plan, and panically shooting the thing, with the missiles only pissing off the purple bowling ball as it whacks the sub into the seabed and storms off. Returning to HQ with moderate injuries, Minami urges Captain Kato to punish him instead for not stopping Goh from firing, despite what Goh did was beyond reckless, which is a nice hint of Minami being a good team player that never lets his comrades suffer. Upon refusing this, Captain Kato fires Goh for his sheer unreliability. Well, what do you expect, you nonce? You're the one that hired him in the first place. God, it's like a parent blaming their kids for getting violent over playing GTA when they're the ones that let them play it. That's what you get for bluntly hiring someone out of the black just because of their determination. It didn't occur to you that he'd be reckless in combat and other operations than just when saving lives? You didn't make sure he was good at following orders and teamwork? You find out the hard way. You lay your bed, you fucking lie on it, you twat. Still, after reconsidering his future, Goh goes back to see Ken to see if they could start work on the second version of their race car, only for Goh to realize the main reason Ken assigned him for Matt was to keep back the information that he considers Goh too old to be a racer and is looking for someone younger. Feeling betrayed and confused, Goh tries to recollect himself before Takkong comes across an oil line, disrupting it to feed on its black gold. With the sudden drop in oil transfer spiking an outcry in acknowledge of Takkong's incoming presence, Matt deploys air and ground support in the incoming resistance, with the beast still easily breaching the oil refinery and sparking chain reactions, causing the place to be engulfed in flames. As Minami hurriedly tries to extract some oil workers trapped underground, Goh comes to assist too, still believing it's his duty, Matt or not. As the two is still going at a too slow rate to get everyone out alive, Goh gets permission to hench in again. This fight against Takkong is pretty meh. Not only is it incredibly short, but the place is so engulfed in fire you can barely see a thing. It's still not bad though, with damn good miniature sets.
Drink! 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 Freaking water!
After finally destroying the chunky one, we're taken to the next day as Goh arrives re-recruited as a member of Matt, with the captain having restored faith and Goh's family wishing him well as he goes off on his journey. What? So you're telling me Goh got recruited for dismissing his safety to save someone, got fired for recklessness, and now got rehired for the exact same thing that got him hired firstly, without improving a single thing that got him fired? They didn't make sure he wouldn't repeat his actions that are as secure as my savings account after seeing the new line of figure whats? Fuck you all. Everyone here is an idiot. Goh for being reckless and not learning anything at all. The captain for yanking a random dude into duty and getting all moody when he turns out not to be fit for the job. His comrades for acting perfectly fine for having some inexperienced random idiot on their team. And Ultraman for deciding to pair with someone who won't act on his mistakes. I saw great potential in how you risked your life. Now we will fuse to protect mankind and... Wait, what are you doing? Stop. Didn't you hear what I said? Did you hear? Why are you being suicidally reckless again? The world rests on your shoulders. Oh, fuck it. I'll just save your ass. It's not like this is going to be a usual thing. Right? Right? Anyway, thus ends the first 2 episodes of The Return of Ultraman. What do I think? It's solid, but had so much potential to be better. I'll try not to compare it to Tsuburaya series, but given how the series just drops the ball in terms of development almost immediately after this, I find it kinda hard to do so. The kaiju action and such are unquestionably awesome here, the speedy cinematography, admirable suitmation skills, and pretty damn neat miniature sets of Tokyo Bay and the oil refinery, but I do have a problem with Earthtron's chunk. I honestly would have preferred it if the whole thing with him and his attacks was shifted to a whole episode. Don't get me wrong, it's damn entertaining stuff, but it just feels so boxed in, and a dramatic shift in pacing, given it immediately follows Gore's recruitment, and eats up a large chunk of the episode that would have been better to fill up with more introduction and setting out of the main characters. Originally, Ultraman was actually supposed to lose to Earthtron and defeat him after hard training and self-sentiment, which would have been a great idea for Gore to actually reflect on his careless actions and earn his place, but understandable to why it didn't happen, given it'd make sense for Ultraman to leave an awesome first impression on domination like the original, plus the episodes wouldn't have the space for such an extra plotline. Maybe leaving Earthtron's second appearance for the third episode would have worked, but still. Plus, the next episode I'll be reviewing had the exact cancelled storyline that I just said, which makes up for it, and a future Ultra show would go to have the same thing for the first episode. Earthtron is a damn solid kaiju though, a simple yet memorable design as well as putting up a good fight, leaves a good impression with Jack's first battle. Then there's the main baddie, Takkong. He is an absolute juggernaut, and a damn interesting one at that, easily beating Zarzan and shrugging off all of Matt's attacks and devastating their advances. His design is easily one of the most unique and interesting in the entire Ultra franchise. The suit may inflict awkward movement restrictions, which really sticks out in the duel against Zarzan, but it's definitely worth it to have one of the most iconic designs in tokusatsu. And on the contrary, there's Zarzan. She has an incredibly poor and lazy design, and is only there to make Takkong look like a hard lad. I would say adding a third kaiju is overdoing it, but simply just showing Takkong over the stretch of 2 episodes would seem a bit tiresome, so the fight in the opening does spice things up, I guess. The unusual choice of having 3 kaiju in 1 episode is a pretty admirable choice of writing to show how far the writers want this to be its own show, although it does jam-pack things to the point where it sacrifices some needed characterization, but keeping the main kaiju for the second episode does nicely spill things out a bit. The main characters have a relatively decent introduction that shows off their main attributes, not that the characters are great or even good for the most part, such as showing Jiro's behaviour to be just as reckless as Gore's, and Aki proving to be a simple background character who's literally there to act all concerned or happy-go-lucky. Ultraman, or Ultraman Jack, is pretty much what you would expect here, a quiet, noble character who only speaks what's necessary, although his heavenly fusion scene with Gore is unquestionably one of my favourite scenes from Showa Toku, and his fighting style is definitely my favourite out of the Ultra series thus far. Not much else to say really, except that the oil refinery scene is actually really similar to Pestar's assault in Oil SOS in Ultraman, given the tense situation of the intense danger of exploding oil reserves and the kaiju suspensefully emerging from the sea. That could be considered lazy, but it's nice to see the designers revisiting used settings and putting a different spin on them. Overall, this is a pretty solid, absolute jam-packed start to the return of Ultraman. Could have been better, but what we've got is entertaining as hell, but still a little frustrating at times. All monsters attack, and Takkong's counterattack gets a 7.5 out of 10 from me, and thus starts my reviews on the return of Ultraman.